Hello and welcome back to Traveling McGee. My name is Derek, and if you are new to my channel, welcome. Today I am in the great state of Pennsylvania, and I am getting ready to take a tour of the Gettysburg National Battlefield. So stay tuned. Alright, so I just pulled into the Visitor Center parking lot here, and before I go in, I kind of want to do a little introduction, I guess you could say, to this video. This is going to be a two-part series. This video is going to be pretty much all about the battle, the battlefield, the history of it all, what to see, what to do, things like that. And then the next video is going to be more about Gettysburg, the town, things to do, things to see, places to eat. So stay tuned for that one. But yeah, I am in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I have been here many, many times. And today we are going to be taking a tour of the visitor center that is here. We're going to be driving around the battlefield, talking about some different monuments that are here, looking at some things of historical interest, talking about the battle. In order for me to keep this video short, because I have a history of talking, I'm just going to kind of give you basic information about the battlefield and this area and its history, as to not bore everyone. The Visitor Center was built in 2008, and it is the fourth or fifth, don't hold me to that, visitor center that has existed here at Gettysburg. It is a beautiful, beautiful building. They have a wonderful museum here, which not only highlights the Battle of Gettysburg, but also the Civil War in general and different battles that were fought during that time period. So I'm really excited to take you up to the visitor center and show you around. So let's go. Now I am here on a Wednesday. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's pretty crowded as of right now. A lot of the parking lots are full. So a lot of people like to get in before lunchtime and do the visitor center, and then kind of drive around the afternoon after lunch and check out the battlefield.
In 1776, the new country had declared. Next morning, James flew back. 12,000 men from Pickett's, Pettigrew's, and Trimble's divisions.
Just wrapped up my little walkthrough of the visitor center. We walked through the museum and saw a bunch of artifacts there. There is a film that you can watch as well. It's about 25 minutes. It's a really great film. The History Channel does it. It really talks about the beginning of the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, and the aftermath. Highly recommend. And then once you get out of the video, you can walk upstairs to the cyclorama, which is that big painting I was talking about. Definitely worth stopping and seeing. The museum, the film, and the cyclorama are one ticket, and it was $14, I believe, for an adult, so not too bad. There is a restaurant, cafe type cafeteria thing in there, so great if you're looking for something to eat. There's also a little snack shop if you just want something quick. The bookstore, walk through there, tons of books, memorabilia, souvenirs, a whole bunch of stuff in there. And then also, you know, the visitor center is just a great place to start when you first get here. There are park rangers that you can get in contact with, ask them questions, figure out best ways to tour the battlefield. They'll give you a map if you need one. You can also reserve a private tour with a park ranger here. That is where you do that. There are also private tour companies in town, but to do a tour with an actual licensed battlefield guide, you do that here through the visitor center. There are trailheads that extend from here out to the battlefield, so this is a hub for that as well. But again, just a great place to start when you first get here to the battlefield before you start on any type of tours, before you do the audio tour. Come to the visitor center first, learn about what actually happened here, see some of the things that were actually here when the battle took place. It's just incredible. Highly recommend. So now I am on my way to the next stop, which is going to be the northern part of the battlefield. This is where the first day of the battle took place. So let's head up there and get out onto the battlefield. The Battle of Gettysburg took place in 1863, 2 years into the American Civil War. Up until this point, the Confederate Army, which represented all of the states below the Mason-Dixon line. And the Confederate Army had they're coming off of several strategic wins, and they felt emboldened enough to try and invade the northern states, the states that were above the Mason-Dixon line, which were represented by the Union Army. And ultimately how the battle started was, again, going with this idea of General Lee wanted to make a good impression on the citizens of the South. He wanted to strike at the North to kind of state his power, to, you know, land a blow to Lincoln and the Northern armies. So invading Pennsylvania, moving above the Mason-Dixon line was very important to him. He wanted to take that opportunity while he could, coming off of these string of major wins. The other reason why he wanted to come into Pennsylvania is because Pennsylvania was just such an agricultural and rich state. So if he could eliminate, you know, hit two birds with one stone, as it were, come in, replenish for his armies, and also land this, you know, morale blow if he were able to successfully win a battle here in Pennsylvania, he would be in striking distance to Harrisburg, which is the state capital of Pennsylvania. We're only about maybe 120 miles from Washington, D.C., so that would set him up strategically for that position as well. So those were the two main reasons why General Lee wanted to come into Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, this is where they met, here at Gettysburg. It was kind of by chance. It was not planned. It was dumb luck, unfortunately, for a lot of people. But it began a 3-day battle, which resulted in 52,000 casualties. Now, that doesn't mean deaths. There were about 7,000 deaths here on the battlefield. The rest of those casualties were either soldiers who were wounded or were missing or captured. So anytime you see the word casualties, it doesn't necessarily mean death. It is involved with it, but it's not all deaths, if that makes sense. So the battle actually took place in July of 1863, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And I don't know if you have ever been outside in July. It is very warm. So try to put yourself back in that time period, carrying the weight that these soldiers had to carry, wearing the wool full body uniforms that they had to wear, the hats. It would have just been absolutely exhausting just to exist outside. You know, heat stroke was definitely a thing. Dehydration was absolutely a thing. So it was just an incredible period of history. You know, they didn't have a lot of the current military resources that we have now. Planes didn't exist. Machine guns were like in their infancy. Bombs were reduced down to single shot cannons. You know, the typical rifle that a soldier would carry was unbelievably inaccurate, and it took between 30 and 60 seconds to load the rifle in between each round. So it's just an incredible period of time to not only be in the military, but to actually fight in the military. Right now, I am in the northernmost part of the battlefield. This is the area where the first day took place, July 1st. This is where the first initial contact between Union cavalry being mounted, horse-mounted soldiers, who came into contact with Confederate infantry, which means soldiers that are lined up together and marching around with rifles. This is the area where they first clashed together, where they first saw each other. And this kind of jump-started the whole conflict here at Gettysburg. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is this monument to John F. Reynolds. And Mr. Reynolds was the highest-ranking military member on either side, Union or Confederate, who died here at Gettysburg. And unfortunately, it happened only within a few moments of the battle. But we're going to go take a look at his monument. This is the monument here for John F. Reynolds. This is where he fell. This is the exact spot where he was fatally wounded. Actually, he had a bullet pierce through the back of his neck, so he died instantly. But this is the exact spot. So there's a small mound here where they had placed the monument. And this is one of several hundred that are scattered around the battlefield. Monument-wise, there are hundreds of them. But each one kind of tells a different story. John Reynolds was actually killed by a sharpshooter, a sniper, as they would have been called back then, but back in these woods here. So Confederate troops were marching through these woods here as the Union Army was behind us here, and that is where they made their attack and came up over this hill here, coming up to this ridge line. And one thing that's unique about the northern part of the battlefield is you get a really good distinction of these ridge line systems. So in front of us here we have the Seminary Ridge, which is just over there, and that is named for those cluster of buildings there. That is the Lutheran Seminary. And this ridge line that kind of starts right here, you can see it slopes this way a little bit and slopes down that way a little bit. This is what's known as McPherson's Ridge, and it extends all the way up to that little rise of trees right there, which is where we are headed to next. Actually, while I'm here and I'm thinking about it, and we're at auto tour stop number 1, you might see a couple of these in this video. They are corresponding markers to an audio tour, which if you use CDs, you can buy them at the visitor center. Most people download an app now where you can play it through your phone, and the idea is you drive along a map to these spots here, and then you correspond that to the audio track, and you park here for a little bit. They have a couple marked parking spots where you stay, and you can listen to what happened in this specific area through your phone. Okay, so we are now here at the Eternal Peace Light, the Eternal Flame. It goes by many different names, but there is a constant burning flame there to represent the eternal peace that's kind of existed after the battle ended. So let's go take a walk around it.
I was hoping to get a little bit.
And you can see once we get up here, you get a really nice view of South Mountain, which is just there, Blue Ridge Mountains. But this whole area here in front of me was a scene of very violent fighting. Union stronghold would have been just in that vicinity here, as the Confederates moved their way this way. And this whole dip right here was a pretty significant area when it came to fighting for the first day. So like I said earlier, one of the first people to get onto the battlefield was Union cavalry, and they first occupied a building in the seminary, which I pointed out in the last location we were. So now I'm going to take you over there and show you to where he would have actually stood to see out over the battlefield to kind of dictate where his soldiers went. All right, so now we are standing at the Lutheran Seminary, which is what I mentioned when we were just over there. Not all of these buildings existed during the battle, but one did, and that is this one right here behind me. And you can see from the top of the building, there's that small greenish kind of cupola looking top to the building. That is the vantage point that the senior military leaders use to kind of get vantage points to look out over the battlefield and dictate to their soldiers where they should go. Today, this building is a museum. It's called the Seminary Ridge Museum. It focuses on the first day of the battle as well as the events that took place here on the seminary campus. It also talks about local residents, what they went through during the battle. It's a very interesting museum. It's not affiliated with the National Park Service, but it's definitely worth checking out. This area is still used as a seminary today. It is the United Lutheran Seminary. Some beautiful buildings here on this campus. But again, the main attraction here is this one. This is where the museum is located, and not only are you able to go through the museum, but you are able to take a tour from the top of the building up in that cupola. I believe it's for an extra fee, but it's definitely worth checking out. So here's a nice marker here depicting the front of this building, which is right here. And from that height up above there, you could get a pretty good vantage point. So after the events happened on the first day, July 1st, and more reinforcements from the Confederates showed up and pushed the Union forces through the center of town through the night, which I'm sure was pretty scary for anybody that was still in town civilian-wise. The Union knew that they had to find a defensive position, and they formed this defensive line in the shape of a fish hook. The bottom of the fish hook was a little round top, and then it came up Cemetery Ridge and curved around until it hit Culp's Hill. And right now I'm in an area where there was a lot of fighting on the second day, July 2nd. This is an area known as the wheat field. And what happened was the Union Army decided to take more of an offensive position and extend the middle of their line a little bit forward to an area called the Peach Orchard. And from there, unfortunately, the Confederates saw gaps in the line, so they were able to kind of penetrate. And by doing this, there was a tug of war throughout the afternoon on July the 2nd of who would hold this middle ground, because the Union Army had all of a sudden exposed their flanks. The Confederates knew this, so they knew their weaknesses, so they were able to swoop around and maneuver around that. So throughout the day throughout the afternoon on July the 2nd, this area where I'm currently standing in the wheat field changed hands approximately 7 times. So at one time it was Union held, and then it was Confederate held, and then it was Union held again, and then Confederate held again. And unfortunately, this became one of the most bloody parts of the battlefield because there was so much conflict here. Literally, men were fighting on top of corpses. The sounds must have just been unreal. The air would have been thick with gunpowder, smoke from cannons and from guns firing. There would have been shouting and screaming. There would have been bugle calls and drum rolls, and just I don't think I can even put into words how it would have been. But this area saw an incredible amount of fighting, with the Confederates coming from the west, with the Union Army coming from the east, all meeting in this small little field which extends down past these monuments here, over and across this little hilltop, and then down to where that fence line is. There would have been so much chaos here, and even though today it's a peaceful field with stone monuments and there's birds singing and there's a nice breeze, and it's just incredible. But this is the infamous wheat field. But now I'm going to be walking to another area that was very significant on July the 2nd, which was called Devil's Den. It is a boulder outcrop, which was highly sought after because of how defendable it was. It's easy to hide around big boulders. So let's take a walk to Devil's Den. I did want to mention too that over the past 20 years, the National Park Service has done a really just incredible job of transforming the battlefield and even parts of town into the way that it would have looked during the actual battle. So a lot of times they will buy a property and demolish them, especially if they are in an area where there was intense fighting. Any structures on the battlefield that were constructed after the battle have been torn down. If you're out on the battlefield, you'll notice that there are no electric lines on the battlefield. That was done purposefully. They were moved underground so that people could get a better view of the battlefield. So they have gone through great lengths to try and turn the battlefield today back into what it would have looked like then. So after the Confederate Army was successful in pushing the Union Army out of the wheat field, the Union Army then retreated to an area which is right behind me known as Devil's Den. And it is this massive outcropping of these huge boulders. And it was quite a defensive area for Union soldiers, as they could kind of hide in between them. But then they were eventually pushed away from here. They retreated to this area, which is now known as Little Round Top, this open face hillside here. And it was from Little Round Top that Union soldiers began to fire on Confederates that were now using Devil's Den as a defensive position. And this went on for pretty much the rest of July 2nd, back and forth, boom, 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 until eventually it got dark and they gave up and just kind of laid silent for the night until the beginning of July 3rd. Unfortunately, I can't take you up to Little Round Top because they are doing some renovation work to some of the monuments and the sidewalks up there, so that is all closed. I can't even drive up to it, but Devil's Den is open, so we're going to walk around there. If there are parts of the battlefield where you can actually still see damage from the battle, this is a great example. I'm here at the Trostell farm, which is not too far from Devil's Den, but you can clearly see that hole right there between the two diamonds where a cannonball clearly struck the barn, and it's still standing obviously, but that's definitely a great example of artillery damage to some of the structures here on the battlefield. There were a lot of structures on the battlefield that were burned or set on fire due to the battle, so a lot of them are lost. But a lot of the structures and homes that you will see on the battlefield, definitely check the outside. Sometimes you will see still bullet holes and damage from shells and things like that, but this is a great example of a artillery shell damage. Here is another example on the Trostell farm, just a few hundred feet from that barn, but just at the top of this building, right where the two sides of the roof meet, you'll see a round object in the wall, actual ordnance from the Battle of Gettysburg. All right, so now I am here in an area of the battlefield known as Culp's Hill. And Culp's Hill was another example of a high ground situation here during the battle, similar to Little Round Top, where, you know, the Union Army was on the high ground, the elevation, so they were able to shoot down from a defensive position, whereas the Confederate soldiers had to kind of run up these hillsides, scale these hillsides and get around boulders and things like that, all while trying to shoot up. Very, very difficult. So Elevation gain is a very important thing when it comes to defensive maneuvers. And this is the case here at Culp's Hill as well. So I'm going to attempt to show you some original breastworks, so an area of kind of like a trench. And then I'm also going to show you a burial site of a unknown Confederate soldier. Culp's Hill is considered the barb of the hook defensive line formation for the Union line. There is a observation tower here at the top of Culp's Hill. There are a ton of monuments here to see. It's a beautiful area to walk around. It's usually not very crowded here. It's not one of the more popular places in the park. So it is great if you like to hike around and explore and see a bunch of different monuments. Obviously, that's probably why you're here, and to learn some history. So this is the area of a unmarked Confederate grave. There are, I don't know if there are other ones besides this one, but this is the one that I know of. Typically there is a Confederate flag here, a small one. Now it looks like someone has placed a cross here and some stones, which is typical for this area, but it's not very well known. Not a lot of people know about it, but if we continue to walk down this trail, we should get a pretty good example of some breastwork or some trench systems that existed here during the battle. So yeah, here's a great example of some of the trench works that's you can still see. They're still pretty visible. They go and extend up this hill here. They kind of go all the way around Culp's Hill, but this is one that's very visible, and you can see it kind of continues this way and it loops up the hill going that way. But there are several monuments here. Again, Culp's Hill was a very, very fought after position on the battlefield because of its elevation. And that kind of concludes day two. You know, once the battle lines are kind of drawn, everybody kind of settles in, and each side is kind of waiting for what the other side is going to do. And on July 3rd, General Lee decided to go on the offensive and to put in motion Pickett's charge, which we're about to head there right now. Okay, well, now I am standing here behind the Pennsylvania Monument. Because Gettysburg is in Pennsylvania, the state decided that, hey, we want the biggest state statue on the battlefield, and it is. This is the largest state memorial here on the battlefield. And we are very close to the area where Pickett's charge took place, but this is an extremely popular place on the battlefield. A lot of people are here, so let's go check it out. The square bricks around the bottom list every name of soldier that was enlisted from the state of Pennsylvania, specific to the Battle of Gettysburg. There are several statues around the sides. There is also a second floor just below the dome there where you can walk up to the top. There is actually a state memorial for every single state that had soldiers involved here at the battle, both Confederate and Union states. And each one is different in its own right, and they're quite impressive and beautiful to look at, and it's definitely worthwhile to check out each and every one. So right now I am standing right in the middle of the field where Pickett's charge would have taken place. So from just over here to about a mile down to the south, all the way along this tree line, thousands of soldiers, thousands of Confederate soldiers this would have been their staging area for their approach as they came across this field during the assault of Pickett's charge, all the way through this area and getting over beyond that red barn. The Union Army was stationed just above that fence line there. But behind me is the Virginia Monument, which I will be getting a little bit closer to in a few seconds. But this would have been the area for the most major bombardment on American soil. There were approximately 300 cannons going off at one time during Pickett's charge, in the bombardment before Pickett's charge, actually. And there is legend that says that the sound, the boom from this conflict was heard as far away as Pittsburgh. I don't know how true that is, but it's a legend that is a thing. But well, I'm sure it was definitely heard in towns not too far from here. But just incredible to be right in the middle where so many people, so many individuals, so many young men came to the end of their life here, and just the horror and the sounds and the smells and the undeniable reality of what took place here is quite humbling. Behind me is the Virginia State Memorial, which memorializes not only General Lee, but all the soldiers that fought here from the state of Virginia. And on the morning of July 3rd, on the day of Pickett's charge, as Confederate soldiers came out of the wood line here behind me, their main objective was this small little patch of trees right here. That was the objective. A mile long's worth of soldiers and men all converging to that one spot. And this was the focal point right here. This little grouping of trees. That was the objective, to get to this point. All up and along here was all Union lines, all waiting just over the hills. They were laying flat so they wouldn't be seen. And behind them were just layers and layers of cannon just firing out into this field. And out across me, where we were just a few minutes ago, right at that tree line, thousands of Confederate soldiers stepped out and marched all the way across here. If there was one place you didn't want to be, it was right here, because every single Confederate cannon was firing to this position. Once the Confederates crossed over this road here, where this car is driving by, which is called the Emmitsburg Road, that is when infantry then stood up and began firing out into this field here, and it was just a bloodbath. And there were a few men that did make it to where these group of men here are standing, but not for very long, and they didn't last very long, sadly. They were quickly either killed, wounded, or taken captive. A lot of the soldiers that were involved with the assault ultimately paid with their lives. General Pickett would have been sitting on his horse right here in this farmyard, watching all of this happen and all of this go down in amazement and astonishment and just disbelief that 3/4 of the men who he asked to walk across this field would not come back. And it's heartbreaking, and it's sad, and it's unbelievable to think what it actually looked like, what it sounded like. Yeah, just incredible piece of American history right here. So after a cannonade that lasted approximately 2 hours and an infantry assault that lasted another 3 hours, the Confederates were repulsed back and had to make the long journey back to where they started from in the tree line. Wounded, carrying the dead, carrying muskets and bags and all sorts of things, and trying to trudge through the debris and the fires and everything that was involved with that day to make it back to where they needed to go. And that really ended the conflict here at Gettysburg. General Lee decided that it was over. It was done. Too many men were lost. There was not enough men ready and able to make another stand like they tried to do. And General Lee decided it was time to leave Pennsylvania. So the Battle of Gettysburg was not only a turning point in the war, but it was also a a victory for the people of Pennsylvania, for the people of the Union, to prove after several losses that they had just endured that they are now capable of winning on their own turf and keeping the enemy away. After the afternoon of July 3rd, the Confederate Army tried to regroup and regather the wounded as best as possible, and they began to vacate the area very, very slowly. And at which time the Union commander, General Meade, made the wise decision, in my opinion, to not pursue, to not follow through and attack as they were trying to leave. I think both armies were deeply, deeply hurting and in pain, and needed some time to regroup and heal and take care of the wounded and bury the dead and so forth. And it was just an awful 3-day conflict that's ended here on this field, and it's pretty incredible to be here in the middle of it, to be standing on the same ground. It's humbling, honestly. Believe me when I tell you, there is a lot more to Gettysburg than what I have just shown you today. I've probably shown you maybe about a third or maybe even a quarter of what there is to see and do here just on the battlefield. Today we were able to walk around the visitor center, look at the bookstore, watch a movie, go through the museum, and then we took a nice little tour through the battlefield. Again, only stopping at more popular places here in the park, but there are tons of different places that you can stop and explore here on the park. There are miles and miles of hiking trails. There are miles and miles of horseback riding trails. There are reenactments that take place here during the summer months. There are events that go on all year round. There's just so much to see and do just here on the battlefield, and I hope everybody enjoyed this little video and my tour, I guess. For tomorrow's video, I'm going to be transitioning more into town. We're going to be taking a walk through the cemetery. We are also going to be walking around downtown, looking at some different shops and some restaurants, and hopefully everybody stays tuned for that video. But until I see you tomorrow, thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking out to the end of another video, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.